waking up a little bit. Look, I know it's like 5 degrees outside and everybody's tired. But we're going to pick back up into Revelation. And we're going to be in chapter 13 tonight. So if you'll go ahead and open up there. And kind of the plans, let me pull this up real quick. The plans that we're going to go with for the next few weeks here, that's the sermons, not classes. We'll be able, hopefully, to get through all of 13 tonight. And then next week, Lord willing, we'll work on 14. And then after that, the week after that, which I think is the 17th, we will be coming back from Florida. And so that night, we will not be having class on Revelation. And so we'll try to... we won't have class that week, but then we'll just kind of go from there with the rest of it. But right now, we should be able to get through 14 before that happens. So we'll be in chapter 13 tonight. The handout should just be one sheet of paper that's front and back. There wasn't multiple tonight, so that should be good as well. So let me get this open here. We're going to try to do a little bit of referencing back to some things. I know it's been a couple weeks with last week's special service we had downstairs with the chili supper and having it on Tuesday night. We didn't have class, and so I know it's been a little bit since we've been in chapter 12, but to remind ourselves just a little bit, the main things in the hearing and the keeping of chapter 12 to lead us into chapter 13. Number one is to remember that there's a real spiritual war that's taking place. We need to look at the world in that way. We don't literally see a dragon or a woman that's being punished like is what is described in chapter 12, but there is a spiritual war that is going on for the souls of people. The second thing in the hearing and keeping is Jesus defeated the devil and he was caught up into heaven, and the same will happen to us. When Jesus returns, that same word is used in 1 Thessalonians 4:17, that we will be caught up when he returns. And so we need to remember that and celebrate that. God lets the devil loose in the world to do his work. We don't see him physically, but we do see his influence in the world. And for us, we need a balanced theology of the devil. We don't want to give the devil too much credit. This mindset of nobody can stop him, which, by the way, we will see that tonight as well in chapter 13, kind of that mindset or that phraseology of nobody can overcome this, nobody can stop this force. And don't give the devil too much credit. But at the same time, don't be blind to the fact that he does wield an influence. And so we need to remember that. The Bible never tells us to be afraid of the devil, which is interesting. The Bible never tells us to run from the devil. It says to resist the devil, and the devil will actually run, he will flee from you, James 4 and verse 7. And so that was kind of some things to remember about the devil. And to connect with that, the devil can be overcome. Everything that we have, everything that's mentioned in chapter 12 and verse 11, we have with us today. That's how they overcame, and that's how we overcome. And when you look back at chapter 12 and verse 11, it says they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. In other words, they didn't cling to their life unto death. They did not hold their life as more valuable than their faith. Their life on this earth, I should say, as more valuable than their eternal soul and their faith. And that's how they overcame. We can overcome in the same ways by remembering and clinging to the blood of the Lamb, by the word of our testimony, and don't cling to our life above our faith in Jesus. Our eternal life is more important than this physical world. The next thing is victory only comes in Jesus Christ. We are in good standing with God based on what Jesus has done. Paul mentions in Galatians 6, about verse 14, that he's going to boast in the cross. He doesn't boast in anything else save the cross of Jesus Christ. And for us, we need to be like Paul in that respect. Paul was an expert in bragging on Jesus. And we need to be an expert in our lives in bragging on Jesus as well. We need to learn to do the same thing. The last two, we can win in the wilderness. The wilderness is not a bad thing in the Bible. It's where God refines us and helps us. We can win in the wilderness. It's not to defeat us. And the last thing, the devil's time is short and his influence is limited. If you are trying to live for God, the devil's going to keep coming after you. If you never run into the devil, it might be because you're running in the same direction with the devil. And he's not pursuing you because you're just following him. And we don't want that to be descriptive of us. So, very quick overview there. Hopefully you still have your notes in your binder to look back over those. But we need to get into chapter 13 tonight. So, up to this point, we've met the dragon. And now tonight, we're actually going to meet two beasts. There's these two beasts that we're going to look at, the sea beast and the land beast. And when you add these two beasts together with the dragon, the sea beast, the land beast, and the dragon, you almost get a parallel trinity of sorts, like a contrasting trinity. We have a trinity, right? As Christians, what's our trinity? The Father, the Son, the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. Well, we're going to see another trinity that's kind of coming forth in chapter 13 in the dragon, the sea beast, and the land beast, and why that's happening. When you think of the persecution that God's people are going to face here and have been facing, what really comes, is there a book of the Bible that comes to your mind when you think of God's people that are constantly facing persecution? Don't say Revelation, but a book of the Bible that comes to mind where God's people are constantly facing persecution and the enemy overwhelming them. And I'll give you a hint, it's in the Old Testament. It's got some pretty big persecution scenes. One is really hot. One involves some hungry animals. There we are. Daniel. When you read Daniel, of course, God's people is taken into captivity by the Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar eventually takes over as king of Babylon. And you have Daniel and his friends. And at the time, they don't know that they will for sure be healthier by eating the food that they're going to eat versus what the king is demanding them to eat. But they trust in God and they do it, and God blesses them. They put their faith in God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, can you imagine what went through their mind when they were probably expecting the flames to consume them, and then they realized they're standing in the middle of the fire and they're not being burned at all? That's pretty crazy to think about. And so you read Daniel and you see persecution and you see God's people going through that. And so keep that in mind. We're going to come back to Daniel throughout tonight's lesson in some ways. So let's first, we're going to read the first 4 verses and we'll talk about the sea beast and then we'll pick up in some other verses as well. So chapter 13, verse 1. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" Okay. We see the sea here, and do we know anything about the sea in the Bible? What is it a place of? When we read about the sea in the Bible, it's a place of what? Give you a hint, it starts with a W. It ends with ickedness. Wickedness. Steve, that's a good guess. The sea in the Bible, it usually, and a lot of times, it references wickedness, okay? And so that's what we have here. Now, if you look at Isaiah 57, I'm just going to read this real quick for us, so we've got a lot to cover. But verse 20 says, "But the wicked are like the troubled sea." Isaiah 57, verse 20. "When it cannot rest, whose waters cast up mire and dirt. There is no peace, says my God, for the wicked." No peace for the wicked. And the wicked are like the troubled sea. And so this idea of the sea, we see wickedness. And as this is described, God's people would think of we got trouble coming our way. Okay? That's kind of what's being stated. Now, how is the beast described in verse 2? What are some descriptions of the beast? A leopard. What else? A bear. You got 7 what? 7 heads. Some say this might be the 7 hills of Rome. 10 thorns. 10 is a number of completeness and power. Horns also represent power. But then you have this description to a leopard and a bear. And does anyone, some Bibles have cross references, others don't. But and I understand that those cross references are done by humans, right? By men usually. And so there is a certain sense of imperfection there at times. But if you've got a cross reference, what does your cross reference say in relation to verse 2? Do you have anything there? Or excuse me, verse 1. Verse 1. Chapter 13, verse 1. Do you have a cross reference to another passage? What does it say? Well, there's the okay, Revelation 13:1, but what's the cross reference to it? Yeah. No, you're fine. Yeah, okay, Daniel 7. Let's go to Daniel 7. Verses 2 and 7, but really verses 1 through 8. And so this is verses 1 and 2 of chapter 13 of Revelation. They connect us back, they pretty much throw us back to Daniel chapter 7. So flip over there real quick and let's look at this together. Okay, Daniel 7. And we're going to read the first 8 verses. And listen, here's a vision of these 4 beasts. Listen to what's said here, connected back to Revelation 13. It says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Verse 5, suddenly another beast, a second like a bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and they said thus to it, arise, devour much flesh. Verse 6, after this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up from among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots, and there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. You've never read chapter 7 of Daniel, have you? Chapter 6 is the lion's den, but here we get into Revelation talk, right? But there's your connections. You saw some reference to a bear, a leopard, these beasts. You saw the 10 horns, and so this is connecting us back to Daniel. Now, in Revelation 13, I want to ask you this question. Who do you think this first beast is describing? Let's start here. In chapter 12, we read about a dragon. Do you remember who the dragon represented? Satan, okay? So the dragon is representative of Satan. So if we're talking about 3 beasts here, dragon, sea beast, land beast, if the dragon is the devil, mark him off. Who do you think the sea beast is? Based off these descriptions of power and coming in and dominating and the world's worshiping this beast and all these kinds of things. What does that sound like? Rome, the Roman Empire, right? Because you have emperors like Domitian in the Roman Empire that demand to be worshipped. You have this emperor worship that's going to become a big part of who they are and what they want, what they desire. And you have the world that looks on at Rome and says, who can overthrow these people? And so instead of trying to, they go along to get along. And that's part of the reason there's such warning throughout the book of Revelation. Don't compromise and become part of them. They're getting their reward, their destruction. If you become a part of them because you're worried about what you might have to endure, you will face that destruction too. And so this beast is the Roman Empire. Now, how did this beast, it talks about how powerful it is and stuff, but how does it get its power? What does John say? He gets the power from where? The dragon. The dragon gives this beast the power. Verse 3 mentions, by the way, the dragon again is the devil, okay? So the devil is giving Rome this power, if you will. Verse 3 mentions that the beast is mortally wounded, but what happens? It's healed. So, all right, real quick. You've got... sorry, I've got this sweater on, and so my mic is to the side, and every time I turn my head, it gets weird. But you've got these three, almost like a separate trinity, representative of Rome's trinity. The dragon, sea beast, land beast. Father, Son, Spirit for the Christians, okay? Then you have Jesus rising from the dead. Oh, we think we've conquered him. Nope, the tomb is empty. Then you've got over here, almost, this passage here is almost like a mock resurrection. If you think about it, it's like a parallel to the resurrection. Because it's mortally wounded, but it's healed. And what that really is saying is, every time that Rome looks, hey, the Roman Empire looks like it's about to crumble, they were healed and they were back on their feet and they were going at it again. And so that's really what that's kind of saying. They're not defeated, at least not yet. Now, what does it tell us that the whole earth was marveling at this beast? Who is worshiping the beast? Who's marveling at it? Everybody's doing it, right? It says the whole earth, and when it tells us that, what it means is, hey, everybody's doing it. Now, connecting that to us, we're not supposed to follow the multitude, right? We're not supposed to follow everyone else. Now, question... You know that, right? That's not the question, but you know we're not supposed to follow everybody else, right? In fact, you probably try to teach your kids, be a leader, not a follower. The more you follow, the more you might be led into trouble. So lead and lead right, in a sense. So you know that there is danger in following, especially, there's danger in following a crowd that is moving away from God. Now, we say, hey, don't follow that crowd, don't follow that. But why is it easier to say that than it is to actually listen to our own advice? Peter was that way, right? I'm not going to deny you. Not a chance. There's no way I'll deny you. I'd never do that, Jesus. But then the time came, and he did it. I can't believe, as we read the Bible, I can't believe they did that. You know, if I was there, I would not do that. Are you sure? I would like to think so, but we're not living in that. And so that's something to kind of keep in mind, too, as we read through this. It is easier to say what we know we need to say than it is to actually do what we're saying. Brother Bob? Yeah, Brother Bob mentioned that when Jerry Barber was here, that one of his things that he would say, one of his pet peeves was when people would say never, and so his saying was, never say the word never. And there's something to that. We want to be confident that we wouldn't. Peter was confident. Now, was Peter a bad person when he denied Jesus? No. He made a sinful choice. He denied the Lord, but it just shows you the power of the crowd. The power of fearing earthly persecution and rejection, the power of the fear of rejection. A lot of what we do at times is because we're scared to be rejected. And so some people never do anything out of the fear. Hey, you can't reject me if I don't ask. So some people never do anything out of the fear of rejection. And so anyways, just something to kind of think about there. Now in verse 4, this worship, okay, that we were reading about. If you look back at verse 4, they worship the dragon who gave authority to the beast. They worship the beast, who's saying, who's like this beast, who's able to make war with him. So the people were actually worshiping the emperor of Rome during this time. And this shows us that everyone in the world worships something or someone. People don't stop worshiping, they really just switch gods. Someone says, well, I don't have faith anymore in God. I'm not going to follow God anymore. I don't have faith. And so it's like, okay, well, who do you worship now? And they might be confused by that question, but maybe it's they're worshiping themselves. Their God has become themselves. Maybe their God has become worldly things or things that, someone of this world. Everybody worships someone or something. And this really shows us that as well as we read here. People don't stop worshiping. They just switch gods. Now, what did they think about the beast at the end of verse 4? They were in awe of it to the point that they cried out what? What did they say? Does that sound familiar to you? Anybody who's like the beast? Does that kind of thinking, that thought process, that attitude, that heart, does that sound familiar? Do you remember hearing that about anyone else in Scripture, anywhere else in Scripture? I'm glad you asked where that is. I'll show you. Let's go to Exodus chapter 15. Actually, first let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 2, and then we'll go to Exodus 15. 1 Samuel 2. Anybody know what's going on here in 1 Samuel 2? This is Hannah's prayer. She wants a son. She begs for a son. She promises what if she has a son? What's her vow she makes back in chapter 1, verse 4, and verses 4 and following? If the Lord will give her a son, she'll devote his life to serving the Lord, right? Okay? The end of chapter 1, Samuel is born and Samuel is dedicated. Chapter 2, you have a beautiful prayer by Hannah. Look at verse 2 of this prayer. No one is holy like the Lord. For there is none besides you, nor is there any rock like our God. What'd they cry out? Who is like this beast? What did Hannah cry out? There's no one like our God. No one is holy like our God. No one is a rock like our God. And so there is that heart and that mind of Hannah. After God blesses her with her son, she's dedicated him to the service of the Lord like she promised she would do, and now she prays this powerful and this beautiful prayer. And if you've not read that prayer in a while, just if you want to do some daily Bible reading tonight, add that on to whatever else you plan to read, and read that beautiful prayer. It's a blessing of a prayer. And let's go to one more passage, and this is in Exodus 15. Exodus 15. Now, at this point, chapter 14, you have the crossing on the ground where the Red Sea's parted. So crossing the Red Sea happens in chapter 14. This is right after that crossing of the Red Sea. Moses, there's this song of Moses beginning in verse 1 of chapter 15. And when you look at verse 11, notice what it says. Moses says this about God after going across the Red Sea. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? Interestingly enough, another sidebar, we talk often about all these different descriptions of who God is, and when we started our series on worship, we really tried to focus in on this idea of Him being holy. And what were the two things that really were focused on and praised by both Hannah and Moses? The holiness of God. That He is separate from everyone, from every other God, little g, from every other person, from every other thing. There is nobody like our God. He's completely separate. These people see the greatness, in our text here in chapter 13 of Revelation, they see the greatness of the Roman Empire. And so they cry out at looking at that greatness, they say, who is like this and who can fight against it? Who can overcome it? Now today, there's kind of a saying, if you go against what the masses think or believe today, then people might say this, and forgive me if I have no other way to use this word, but they might say, if you don't follow along what the masses are saying and believing, are you stupid? I know we don't like that word. Don't tell your kids that Cody said stupid. But the better, are you crazy? The question really is like, do you not get it? Why? That's weird. Why don't you believe this too? Why don't you catch up to everybody else? Oh, you're so old-fashioned. That's not how it is today. And there's all these different phrases they use to try to make us feel crazy or silly or, lack of a better word, stupid or, inferior in intellect because we might not feel or believe like they do, as we realize that what they're doing is moving further from God, and it's not what God designed. But yet we're the ones criticized of being certain things. Now, their mentality here and the mentality of a lot of people in our world today is everybody is doing this, so just go with the flow. The path of least resistance in this case is when you stop trying to paddle against the flow and you let the current of the world just take you. Oh, it's easy, but it's leading you to a great fall, and it's not into a body of water. It's to a devil's hell. And we can't go with the flow of the world, even though it feels comforting and easy and relaxing at times. It's all deceiving to get us to stop swimming towards God. The Christian life is a constant paddle against the current of the norm. But we got to keep swimming. Just like Dory said in that great scholarly work, Finding Nemo. Just keep swimming. Wasn't it Dory that said that, or did I make that up? I think it was Dory. I haven't seen Finding Nemo in a minute. Our kids alternate between so many animated movies now. I don't remember who's in what anymore. All right. But they're thinking that because of the domination they've seen and they've experienced that Rome has. And they're like, why go against that? We'll just go with the flow. You can't overthrow Rome. Now let's pick up in verse 5. Let's go back to chapter 5 before we get to the next section here of chapter 13. You can't overthrow Rome. That's their mindset. Now, real quick, look at chapter 5, verse 9. Verse 8 begins talking about the scroll that's taken, the 4 living creatures, 24 elders. They all fall down before the Lamb, okay? Each has a harp, golden bowls full of incense, and those are the prayers of the saints. They sing a new song, and what do they cry out to the Lamb? You are worthy to take the scroll, to open its seals, for you were slain and have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation, and have made us kings and priests to our God, and we shall reign on the earth. And then verse 11, then I looked and I heard the voice of many angels, and these angels are crying out, what? In verse 12, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power, riches, and wisdom, and strength, and honor, and glory, and blessing. They cry out again in verse 13, blessing, and honor, and glory, and power be to him who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb forever and ever. Why read this? This is that parallel to what Rome has. We look at a lamb that was slain, that will not be defeated, that is victorious, that will deliver his people. Who can overthrow him? Nobody. They look to Rome and they say, who's powerful enough to overthrow Rome? They don't think anybody. So you really see a running this current of thought for both sides. And I don't want to use the word mascot, but in a sense it's almost like both sides have their champion, if you will, in essence. They're mascots, if you want to put it that way. These spiritual mascots of sorts. The Christians know that their God can defeat the beast, but the world has no idea what's coming. They don't believe it. They don't think about that. The beast has been given great power, and everybody on the earth worships the beast, and they don't think this beast can be defeated. But let's go to verse 5 of chapter 13. Let's finish talking about the sea beast, and then we'll move on to the land beast before we run out of time. And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Quick question, what does that 42 mean again? It's a period of what? An ending period of persecution, of some kind of struggle or persecution. 42 months, 3.5 years, 1,260 days, times time and half a time, all those saying the same thing. Okay, so he's given authority to continue with this power and this dominance for 42 months, or in other words, for a period of time that has an end. It's not forever. Verse 6. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. All right. What is the image that John has of this beast? In other words, how would you describe the beast's interaction with the earth? What does it look like based off what this is saying? Utter what? Just domination. He appears to be very dominant. Appears to be very dominant. Now, what does the word blasphemy mean? Okay, so contempt, or in other words, to speak against is what the word really means. And you see that as it continues in verse 6, opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name. Blasphemy is to speak against. And we said, who's the beast blaspheming against in verse 6? I already told you one of them. What? Against God, but not just God. Who else? Christians. Christians, okay? God and the church. Question. Do you think God cares about that? Specifically that last part, the church? In the story of Saul, when Jesus appears to him on the road to Damascus, what question does Jesus ask Saul? Why are you persecuting me? Highlight it, underline it, circle it, star it, whatever you want to do. Put emphasis on that me. And then I would write down, if you've got in your Bible, that as you read Acts 9, I would go back and I would write beside that Acts chapter 8 verse 1 and Acts chapter 9 verse 1. Because when you look at what Saul did, what he actually did, he was wreaking havoc against the church. He was going out and he was persecuting Christians. And on the road to Damascus, he wasn't headed to Jesus. He was headed to Christians' places, to take Christians, to arrest Christians, to persecute Christians. Saul's focus was on hurting and harming and persecuting God's people, the church. And Jesus looks at him and he says, hey, you are doing that to me. I want to give you something to chew on and to think about. And I'm not saying this to anybody in particular. I'm saying this as a warning for all of us as a part of God's people. When you do things to hurt the church, when you say things to hurt the church, when one place makes you mad and you leave and all you do when you leave is talk bad about the place that you left, every time you try to hurt the church or you do hurt the church in word or in action, every single time you hurt Jesus. Whatever you do to the church, you do to him. I don't know of a husband in here who would not feel offended and upset and be defensive of their wife who was hurt by somebody else. And I say that passionately, not because you've done something to me. I say it passionately because I love the church. And too many people think it's okay to hurt the church. Whether it's ministers, whether it's members, whether it is deacons or elders or secretaries or whoever else out there that's a part of the church, too many people think it's no big deal to gossip about the church, to drag the church through the mud to try to make themselves look or feel better, to do things to actively hurt the church. Every time we do anything like that, Jesus takes it personally, and we've hurt Jesus. And he doesn't take that. He doesn't accept that. Just please keep that in mind. And remember how precious the bride of Christ is. And treat her that way. Brother Jimmy? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and in the song, another mind to go along with that, crucifying the Son of God again afresh. The song, do you know the song "Can He Still Feel the Nails"? You ever heard that one? I'm not going to sing it. The words are, "Can He still feel the nails every time I fail? Can He hear the crowd cry, 'Crucify' again? Am I causing Him pain when I know I've got to change because I just can't bear the thought of hurting Him?" And it's a question to ponder every time that we choose sin and worldly things over Jesus. Does He remember what it was like back on that cross? But here's what I want to throw out to go along with that too. He never forgets what it was like to go through what He went through. He still remembers the nails. Not just every time you fail. He'll never forget the nails. In Hebrews 2:18, the Hebrew author talks about this phrase he uses, He Himself has suffered. That is something that's happened, but it continues to happen. And it's a reference to Jesus continuing to feel the sting of temptation and all that He endured on this earth. And He still knows how all of that felt. And be careful. Be very careful how you treat the Lord's church. Even if you are treated poorly. The church is more important than us just feeling better about our own selves. And while we sometimes are treated poorly and things happen to us and it's not always right what's happened, we can still handle ourselves Christ-like, in a Christ-like manner, and do things that will help the church, not hurt the church. I think there's a great warning there, and that's why I wanted to kind of pause there for a minute. And again, not because I've seen anybody sitting in here do something, but I have seen Christians. I've known ministers. I've seen all kinds of people who don't really care what they say or do in connection to the church they were at before, as long as it makes them look a little bit better. And all that does in the end is it's a lose-lose. It hurts the church, and that person now has done something that hurts Jesus. And nobody wins in that. When I was reading through this and thinking about some of those things, Jesus takes that very serious, and we need to take it serious too. In verse 7, He's allowed to kind of go about on the earth and to have this dominion, to make war with the saints, all these different things. Why do you think God would allow all this to happen? I'm going to give you a hint. We don't know the exact answer. Do you know why bad things happen to good people? Anybody ever asked you that question? I got a short answer that doesn't really suffice for some people, but the main reason bad things happen to good people is as long as sin's in the world, bad things are going to happen to good people. But I will put this out there too. I'm going to ask you this. Does God always deliver His people? Yes. Follow-up question. Psalm 34 verse 19, by the way, reminds us, comforts us with that. But God always delivers His people. I think we agree on that. However, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. Does God always deliver His people like we want to be delivered? No. It's on His time, and it's in His way. You know, James was killed for his faith. And then we read about Peter a little bit later, about midway point of Acts. Peter ends up not being killed at that time and lives for a period of time longer. And we don't really know why James was killed, but Peter was allowed to live longer and go on for a period of time. Faithful people of God are sometimes in this life, in relation to things of this life, they are overcome by the wicked one. Now, not in eternity, but sometimes our deliverance is not in this lifetime. Sometimes the rest God promises is not experienced in this lifetime. But just because you and I don't have a good reason for why God would allow suffering to take place, it doesn't mean that God doesn't have a good reason. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Mr. Gina's saying, when he, in those moments, he's using that to make us stronger, to teach us things, to know to do more, to do better. And we talked about that, I guess, last two classes leading into this one about this idea, and we referenced it at the beginning tonight, that we often refer to these periods of time as being in the wilderness, but the wilderness is not a place of defeat. It's a place where we're refined. I don't do a lot of work with, melting metal and shaping it and all that kind of stuff, whether you thought I did or not. But one of the things I know is if you take that metal and you put it out over a flame for long enough, what can you do? You can take some tongs and you can shape it and form whatever you want it to be. And for us, while being in the fire is painful, it can be a place where we're refined, or it can be a place where we're consumed. Now, if we put our faith in God, just like the burning bush, we won't be consumed, but we'll be refined. Dan Winkler put it this way one time, and it stuck with me when he said it this way, but he said, be very careful when you ask God to use you, because he might have to break you first. And that stuck with me. It's not always painful, but those painful things can lead to growth, or we can let them lead to defeat. I know we're out of time. I shouldn't have said we're going to get through chapter 13 tonight. That was my fault. Next week, we're going to finish chapter 13. We'll look at the land beast and kind of wrap it up. We'll do it rather quickly, and then we'll get into chapter 14. Now, make sure, I think y'all are doing pretty good about bringing your binders, but you're going to need, the next week's handout is not going to have this on it. So tonight's notes on chapter 13, if you need those for class next week, make sure you don't forget your binders so you'll be able to look at those, because next week's handout will just be chapter 14. Thank y'all so much for your attention tonight, your input for a good class. I appreciate you being here despite the cold weather, and we'll see you again in just a few minutes.
Is
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Central Church of Christ. We're thankful and glad that you're here with us. I hope you had a good class this evening. And the invitation song tonight is, say 622? 662. 662 if you want to use a book. If not, it should be on the screen as well. But again, we're glad that you're here tonight and thankful for your presence. It's pretty chilly, if you didn't know, but I'm glad that you decided to brave that and be here. We do have Breakfast with Santa coming up this Saturday. If you've not signed up to help with something, tonight's we'd really like you to do that, so we have a better idea of, do we need to ask some extra people or anything like that. So there's a sign-up sheet up here that Ann put together for us, and you can fill out whatever you're willing and able to do. We want to have enough volunteers so the parents can actually do things with their kids and see their kids actually experience that morning. And so if we can have others helping with some things, that would be great. But if you would like to sign up and haven't yet, just do so before you leave. Lauren would be very appreciative. Maybe you'll sign up if I throw her name in there. Lauren would be very appreciative if you do that. But we are excited about that, and we have other things going on, big things coming up throughout this next year as well, as we've been planning things for the kiddos. And so be prayerful for those things and plug in when you can to help out. Tonight, as we get ready to sing this invitation song, the middle of the week is always a good time to kind of have a spiritual check up on ourselves, to kind of see where we are spiritually. We can feel pretty worn out when you get to Wednesday, and that can weigh on our effectiveness spiritually speaking, and on our focus spiritually speaking. And so tonight, if you're here and you're not a Christian, there is an opportunity for you to become one this evening. If you're willing to repent of the sin in your life, to confess Jesus as the Son of God, and be baptized for remission of your sins, then the Lord will add you to His church, and you can start living a new life as a Christian, as a child of God. If you're here tonight and you are a Christian, but you feel pretty worn down and beat up by this week so far, and maybe you've had some things on your mind and heart for a while now, and tonight just happens to be a great opportunity for you to let God have a hold of those. If you have something tonight that you need to respond for, whether prayers to be restored and prayers for forgiveness, or prayers for strength and courage, whatever it might be, you can come and we'll pray together. But if you have a need tonight, please come as we stand and as we sing.